the post-webinar survey. What is important to remember in our series of webinars, our objective is to talk about the role of PPPs and discuss some of the common myths that particularly we see in PPPs. And hopefully through the case studies, we can see what the evidence suggests. So, we hear that PPPs are a form of privatization that undermines public control of services. Secondly, PPPs are seen to be too expensive and only suitable for large, wealthy provinces and projects. And finally, we want to share what's happening in terms of PPP across the world, and in this case, what's happening in Africa. We hope our panelists will, through their practical experience, share with us what's happening in this space. In terms of our distinguished guests today, I will be moderating. My name is Morgan Pillay. We have Andre Kruger, who is the Chief Executive for PPP Online. And then we have Thorpe Koorts, who is the Program Manager for the Department of Health and Wellness in the Western Cape. And finally, we have Mr. George Kanyika, who is the Infrastructure Management person for the KZN Provincial Treasury. I will introduce them in a little bit more detail as we move along. But in terms of myself, I will moderate. I am the ITAF key expert for infrastructure finance, and I've spent many years, particularly on transactional projects, both in South Africa and in Africa, applying some of the principles of innovative financing. So I think with that introduction, let's move to our first panelist, who is Mr. Andre Kruger. And Mr. Kruger is a very well-experienced professional in the PPP environment. He has a very strong banking background, and he is a core individual in our training program, and he's helping us implement the World Bank accredited PPP professional program. I'm not going to read the rest of his CV. I think that will be available online, but I want to invite Andre just to give us a perspective of what's happening in the PPP health space in Africa. Over to you, Andre.
Thank you. Just getting my presentation on the screen. Thank you. If you can just confirm that it's visible. Thank you.
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Morgan, for the introduction. And thank you, colleagues, for joining us today. We are looking forward to a very interesting session. Also, it being motivational to see if we can open up the doors to more hospital PPPs, specifically in South Africa. And if there are any colleagues from outside South Africa online, the same applies to the rest of Africa. So we will kick off with a little bit of background about African PPPs specifically. We do not have many PPPs, or health PPPs at least, on the continent. Even although there's an increasing number of governments that are interested to developing health or hospital PPPs on the continent. Just last week, we had a very senior group from Kenya in the training room in Cape Town, where they discussed PPPs in general, and then also health PPPs specifically. I'll refer to that briefly as we go along. So we know that PPPs are highly complex models, and it represents a procurement model that we need to deal with. And for that reason, we need a stronger contingent of government project management staff, as well as decision makers, to be able to to consider making use of PPPs in their procurement regimes. I'm specifically adding...
Andre, sorry,
Yes, sir.
we are not able to see your presentation. Can you just reshare?
Sure, let me just close it down. I'll reshare. Is it on screen now?
Yes, I think we see it. Yes.
Is it good? Thank you. I can continue, Morgan?
Yes, please do so.
Thank you. So just on the background then, it's highly complex. We need a stronger contingent of staff on the government side, especially firstly on the project management side and secondly on the contract management side. And then we'll move on and refer a little bit to some African hospital PPPs in the African market, mega projects. On screen, you would see there's a reference to an hospital in Egypt, one in Algeria, one in Morocco, and another also in Nigeria. So, by the way, some of you may have seen the statistics recently published that Nigeria is probably the country in Africa that is the most actively now making use of PPPs. In that sense, I saw that South Africa is at level number 7 on the African continent. So yes, there are quite a number of large hospitals. What this implies is that to develop PPPs for smaller hospitals is maybe not practical, but there's a solution to that challenge. Is then you group your hospitals. And there's literally no restrictions to that. Maybe the only restriction is that we wouldn't be able to group provinces across group hospitals, smaller group hospitals, across provincial boundaries in South Africa at least. But there's nothing stopping us from grouping 1, 2, 3 hospitals and develop them then jointly as PPPs. The typical structure of a health PPP, be it in Johannesburg, be it in Accra, be it in Nairobi, is exactly the same. The principles, the regulatory environment of PPPs across the continent and worldwide is more or less the same. I know people will complain and say, but it's difficult and it's tough. But I suppose governments in their endeavors to more optimally use taxpayers' money should spend that additional time and effort to develop PPPs because they have the ability to develop PPPs, creating value for money, meaning that the private sector design, build, and operate these projects at a lower cost than what governments do. So all PPPs have got a viability gap contribution, especially in the health sector. And it's also proven to indicate or to earn value for money, meaning that it's more affordable for government to make use of PPPs. And it's not because the private sector are so smart, it's because governments set the output specifications, they develop the feasibility study or the appraisal studies, they appoint the private sector and they contract manage the private sector over the life of the project. So on the right of the slide, I'll just briefly refer to the key aspects of a PPP and specifically a health PPP contract. And that would be the construction period, the maintenance period, equipment, non-clinical operations, or clinical, and then the HR aspects. So last week in Cape Town, when we had the Kenya group PPP unit and very senior lawyers from the Attorney General's office, etc., in the room, we discussed these points. And what they were trying to do is to only develop health or hospital PPPs making use or considering the medical equipment and related IT aspects. I suppose after the discussion, they realized that to focus only on one element of a complete hospital may not be optimal, and that you probably need to look at the whole hospital as such, and it may even include the staffing, and I'll get to that point. So we also will address some success factors And number one, right across the world, is political will and political support. That also implies then the required public sector capacity for the public sector to conceptualize, to manage the feasibility study process, developing the so-called output specifications, meaning different from traditional procurement. We want government to tell the private sector what is the outputs that we required in this project. And one key output requirement in the hospital space is obviously electricity. So that facility needs to be serviced 24 hours of the day, 365 days of the year, electricity availability. So it's completely a risk that has been transferred to the private sector. Then there's the issue about creating risk management matrices and for the public sector to lead the transaction advisory team. Once you have awarded your project as a government authority, then there are a few issues specifically relating to contract management that you need to consider. And on screen, you would find the three different areas. The first one being clinical, then access to the hospital, and then quality and efficiency issues. So on screen listed a few issues. Obviously, there are many more, but these are the measures that you use to determine if a hospital PPP is successful or not. And government will also set typical requirements linked to this when they prepare their projects. So the first one on the clinical side, and I'll not deal with everything on screen. The first one and the important one is the average length of stays, days, in the hospital. So you may want to know that worldwide, what is happening with hospitals is that very large mega hospitals is not the flavor of the year anymore. We find specialist hospitals, smaller clinic, localized type hospitals being developed by governments, and not necessarily there's very large hospitals like we have seen on screen what has happened in Africa so far with 4 very big projects. So it's also the development of these hospitals is then obviously also linked to the critical illnesses relevant to that country, and also the expectation of what will happen tomorrow. Hospital readmission rates is something else that you get measured. Hospital-acquired infection rates, very important issues. And then access, inpatient and outpatient volumes, very critical. And if this PPP hospital deliver very good services, you will find that people will not go to the clinics in their regional areas or the local areas, but rather than come to the PPP hospital. And that can create its own problems. I'm not going to go into any one of the other issues, except if there's anything that you want to touch on later. So please make a note if there's anything else you want us to focus on during question time. Then India is obviously not part of Africa. I've slipped this in because India, even although a developed country, also has got some big areas that are in the same space that we in Africa will be, meaning in a developmental states. And in their health sector, what they have done is they have adopted the PPP models that includes a comprehensive service delivery. Comprehensive service delivery. Remember, I referred to Kenya that tend at the moment to look at how can they improve the equipment, procurement and operation of equipment through a PPP mechanism, not for one hospital, but for a group of hospitals. They have agreed afterwards that maybe that's not the best plan, but they will also test that. They will have some pilot programs to test that. So in India, they have gone the full system, whereby the concessionaire will pay the government a fee for the right to operate the concession. They will even go to the extent of delivering the clinical services. So the doctors and the nurses of the hospital will need to be provided by the private sector. Especially in South Africa, where we've got a huge shortage also of nursing staff, etc. It may be one way to alleviate the problem, because the private sector has been training up nursing staff in big numbers. to cater for health services also in this country. So it's something to be considered. Yeah, that is maybe just some reflection on what's happening in the big Indian economy, obviously many times larger than South Africa. Then a few notes on technology. Today, there's not one sector that can escape the very fast development and application of technology in such a sector, and hospitals no different. So this is something that governments need to consider when they develop a feasibility study for a hospital PPP. Who will provide the technology? If it's the private sector, will they keep the private sector responsible to always make use of state-of-the-art technology? And this is relevant for medical equipment as well as the IT activities within a hospital. I think we will hear more from our colleagues, maybe on the Albert Lutuli Hospital in Durban, in eThekwini, KwaZulu-Natal, where the private sector was responsible to provide state-of-the-art medical equipment and have to upgrade that every 4 or 5 years. That risk transfer to the private sector was too big, and we'll hear from our colleague from KZN on what they have done with the second round of that transaction. The project has come to an end, and I'm sure we'll hear from George about that. So in OECD countries, they are also less dependent on large general hospitals and more focused, I've made that point, more focused on specialist clinics and facilities. And then the notion that PPPs are for the long term, and one need to be careful dealing with technology, dealing with healthcare, changes in healthcare requirements over time. And who would assume that risk in the PPP space? Factors influencing health PPPs, especially on the continent, is governance. If you were to Google today after the session, why do we not have more health PPPs on the continent? You will find some of these issues listed on the screen. Governance, number one. Healthcare independent regulation. Benefits will include for government and for citizens, the private sector innovation and efficiencies. And then revenue risk, to whom do you transfer that? I managed to speak to one of the large health companies, private health companies in South Africa that also had investments in the UK, in the NHS hospitals. They had PPPs, 10, 12 hospital PPPs that they invested in. They have divested from that in the meantime. So they have specific views and recommendations also on revenue risk. Who should retain revenue risk, or maybe there's a risk sharing arrangement. So in development of transactions, that is also something that you need to take into account. Then the importance of community participation, NGOs that may be specializing in the healthcare sector, and then the notion of making use of expert advisors called transaction advisors in the PPP space. As government, you must always strive to get the best transaction advisors available in the market. And if they are not in South Africa, you make use of international advisors. The private sector that will be bidding will make use of most experienced advisors from an international level. So you need to be able as government to relate and operate, develop your project on a similar level that the private sector will do when they prepare for bidding. Morgan, thank you very much. So that is just a slight background. We have now seen that there's not that many health PPPs, hospital PPPs on the continent. There is significant scope on the continent. The large health operator, hospital operator in South Africa that I managed to speak to, those that had investments outside of the country, they reckon that they will not participate in health PPPs in South Africa at this point in time because of a perceived lack of political will and political support. That's obviously an important issue, but that we also need to take note of and hopefully also be able to change that picture, that scenario. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andre, for that perspective. I think you raise a number of pertinent points, and I'm hoping our participants will take you up in the Q&A session. Also interesting to note that you rate or the information rate South Africa number 7 in the continent, but you realize we were the first in terms of policy and regulatory development. So we have to think about that. I want to move to our next panelist, and he's going to talk about the real case study, practical work on the ground. His name is Mr. Thor Koorts. He's employed by the Western Cape government. He's been a candidate in our PPP training program, and that's how we got to know about this case study. He's an engineer by training, and we're quite happy to see some of the engineers and the legal people and the financial people take up the course that we are offering. He's currently working on the redevelopment of the Tygerberg Central Hospital as a PPP. And Thor, please share with us your project and some of your insights. Thank you.
Thank you, Morgan. Just to check, you can see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you, Dr. Pillay. Thank you for the introduction, but more importantly, thank you for the opportunity for us to showcase our project. We are extremely excited about our PPP. We're going to become one of these big ones that Andre was talking about. Yeah, and we love showcasing it. So as Morgan has said, I am with the Department of Health, Provincial Department of Health in the Western Cape within infrastructure. And we've got a PPP office, which is at the thick of things to structuring this PPP for the redevelopment of Tygerberg Hospital. And there she is. Sorry, I just want to sort out my screens a bit. There we go. Sorry, I'm gonna switch off my camera. I've been having a few system hiccups. It might just keep things running smoothly. So yeah, so that's the old lady. She was constructed in the early 70s, interestingly based on a Canadian model. And well, she served a very good function. It was a proper service building when it was constructed, but she did not, alas, age too well because of she was constructed in the dual corridor apartheid style. And you can also see there's a lot of linear east-west structure there, which is conducive, I guess, to the Canadian solar gain that you would like, which is not always conducive in South Africa. Just out of interest, at the back, the shiny buildings that you see there is the Stellenbosch University. So the Tygerberg Hospital is in fact an academic hospital. It is the second biggest central hospital in the country. And we plan on being one of those very big PPP projects that Andre was talking about. Slightly scaled down from what it is at the moment. At the moment, it is 1,384 beds. Within our platform, healthcare service platform, we are restructuring to move some of our more primary and secondary healthcare services to regional hospitals that we're busy developing. One in Metro East, one in Metro West, and focusing this hospital purely on tertiary and quaternary services, aligned with the academic principles and as a teaching facility. All right, just to explain our project a bit before we come to the PPP part of it. So we're looking at redeveloping out of the Tygerberg estate, and the PPP is just a part of that. So it fits inside of a larger redevelopment project. And the PPP part of it would be the construction of the new central hospital, which is envisaged to be 894 beds, including 47 that is in existence in our X block. So there's some nuance in the project. Thanks to Andre, who already shared the structure of a PPP. Ours does follow that broadly with a few nuances. So I'll get into that a bit. We're planning 33 theatres, which would include a robotics theatre, a hybrid theatre, and just out of interest, we currently have fulfill the statutory requirement for Coburg Power Station. So we have a nuclear theatre, which we in fact not relocating, because it still serves a good function, and we're trying to streamline the PPP process and the project. So the picture you're seeing there on your right-hand side is a bit of an artist's impression of what the campus would look like in the future. The brown buildings there are the existing ones, all the stuff that's scattered across the campus. You would notice that from that picture I showed you just before, which was from this angle, there's a few protruding fingers there. The ones on the other side would have been demolished. Some central parts of the hospital would have demolished. So we are planning on creating space, and then of course creating a 18-hectare parcel of land to the west of the property, where we envisage the private party to construct a new hospital for us. All right, so the parameters of the PPP that we're planning is it's a PFI of social infrastructure, which means private finance initiative based on availability. We want the private party to do a DBFM. Sorry, guys, I got a lot of acronyms there. I'll talk through them. So we want them to design, build, finance, and maintain, as well as some of the soft services. So the one you don't see there is the O, which is operate. So the service, the mandate to maintain a health service and provide the health service remains with the province. So the doctors, nurses, and management and so forth would remain with us. On the soft services, we've done a detailed responsibility matrix to see where there is opportunity for efficiencies and value for money, and those risks of soft services we can transfer to the private party. One interesting thing is that we exclude HT. So in government talk, that's called health technology. So when we were doing a feasibility study on this project, we recognized that HT could potentially make it a very expensive project. We've had some lessons learned from the Albert Lutuli example, and my colleague George is going to talk about that after this presentation. I'm looking very forward to that. They're doing a second phase PPP on that side. And we have already received TA1 late in 2022 from National Treasury. That stands for Treasury Approval 1, which is a very big deal. It means that Treasury agrees that your project is feasible. It's an endorsement of the feasibility study that was done, and it means you get the backing from Treasury, which is really beneficial. Shortly after that, we had some provincial Treasury ring-fence some capital contribution for our project in line with our feasibility study. And of course, we have support from our HEIs. They are the higher education institutions, a bit more of them. In the Western Cape, we've got the 4 big ones, 3 of them very prominent on site. Right, so for those of you who know your PPP manual, you would recognize some of these headings. We are busy entering into the procurement phase of the process, and those headings are they're straight out of the PPP manual. So you've got TA2 approval there, TA2A, TA2B, and so forth. At the moment, we are putting specifications together, which we hopefully will have towards the middle of the year, in such a state that we can go to National Treasury with those. We follow output specifications format, which means that we are not too prescriptive. Part of our value for money is the fact that we rely on a private industry to bring some innovation to the table. So we're not too prescriptive on the actual layout and specifications. However, we describe what the service that the private party needs to put together for us in more detail, and then allow for some innovation. So as we follow the procurement phase of the PPP process, we get to financial close towards end 2028. During the process, there will be a lot of design work happening and refining of those output specification, which means we should be shovel ready by early 2029 for this project. Right. No project is in isolation. We have got a lot of stakeholders, and we recognize that we need to take a lot of hands and manage a lot of relationships. We call them ecosystem enablers inside the department, they're departmental heroes. I'm not going to dwell on this. This is a bit of a listing of stakeholders, but one important thing is our project, we do recognize that it's got a lot further reach than just our province and even just our country. So we would like our project to be a destination of healthcare service for the continent. And then another stakeholder group that I've already mentioned, these are HEIs, our higher education institutions. So let me just get to this. So we've created a vision of what we want the greater redevelopment project to look like. So the green text there, I mean, gives you a bit of an indication. So with the private sector, we would like to develop a vibrant exemplar medical hub on the state-owned property. And we've gone through some option analysis, and we're looking at the four prongs that influence this, which is the fact that it's a training and academic institution. There would be living accommodation for doctors, nurses, students, and so forth. The service that we're providing and the work that we are doing on site. And we also want to go beyond and create green spaces and a friendly area. So in short, we are quite open to commercial opportunities aligned with our vision to create this medical hub. Right. Andre did touch on governance, and I'm glad he did, because I also want to reiterate how important that is, especially projects as big as these ones. I mean, construction of a central hospital of this size needs proper governance. So this very complicated looking diagram is basically where we stand on our governance structure at the moment. It started off as very simple work streams flowing into a governance body, and then over time it became a bit more complicated, looking like this. The lines and the dotted lines, all of them means very important things. But the take-home message is that governance is extremely important. So we have really gone to length to set up a terms of reference to understand how decisions gets made and what happens if something goes wrong. What is your recourse? How can you escalate issues? And you will see that we fit this inside of our larger redevelopment situation in the Western Cape, in the Metro. There you would see we've got the Metro East and the Metro West coming together in a governance forum. On the side here is where we would fit in the private party flowing into our PPP office. And then we've got a joint implementation committee that flows into higher level, and we can reach to national treasury, national health, and so forth. Also interesting, we've divided it. You'll see the shading of the background. We've got it in 3 tiers. It's bronze, silver, and gold. It's just to align with the tiers we had during COVID, which gives you an idea of how you can escalate issues. Right, that's governance. Okay, I want to talk about finance a bit, one of my favorite topics. So in a PPP, finance is extremely important. Everybody needs to be crystal clear on who pays what when. And I cannot stress how important this is. I mean, we've during the feasibility stage, we've spent a lot of time to come to grips with what is going to be the optimal way of structuring cash flows, on understanding who pays what when and what is the implications of those. So we built two models, a bottom up and a top down. Our bottom up model is based on our departmental budgets, which we project forward. We get to the unbundling of our existing hospital and then moving into our new hospital, and how those operational budgets are projected from there, and what happens then during that crucial time. And then we've got a top-down model that we built along with our transaction advisor, which is a bit more, it's not really too top-down because there is a bit of granularity to it, but that looks from a macroeconomic perspective. It looks at the cost of use compared to other facilities worldwide. And interesting, these two models they end up and they're giving us answers which land up very close to each other, which gave us a lot of confidence to understand that we're on the right path. But there's one thing that we did not know. And that was, we were uncertain that once we get a SPV and we got a private party appointed, what is their capacity to raise finance for our project? And that's something that we were fairly uncertain about. So along with our transaction advisor, we went out and we did a market sounding exercise. But not an exercise to talk to potential SPVs or test the market for tenderers to become our private party. We went one step further and we went to go and talk to financiers. It's a very delicate and sensitive exercise because there is along with transparency, also a lot of confidentiality. So we did advertise broadly. And we were quite surprised that we had a lot of participation, not just within South Africa from local banks, development banks around the continent, but also further abroad from pension funds from Europe and Middle East and so forth. And we had more than 20 very high level financiers from around the world that participated in our market sounding exercise. We spoke with them individually. We maintained confidentiality with each of them because we needed them to be robust and tell us what we needed to know. And we were pleasantly surprised because not only did it indicate that there's a lot of appetite to invest in our province, our project, our country, but also that the cost of finance was slightly better than we thought. Now, okay, there's just a bit of a caveat. That was when the market sounding was done. We know that recently the economic climate has changed a bit and there's all sorts of very vibrant things happening. But so some of our questions that we asked very specifically was like debt equity ratios and cost of capital and those things. And they actually came out slightly better than what we even anticipated during our feasibility study. So what we did is we plugged those numbers back into our financial models, and those models then gave us new answers, which was still in line, but gave us confidence and even slightly better. So that was I think a very progressive activity for our project. Then I wanted to talk about some lessons learned. I see I called it challenges there. I don't want to really say challenges. Let's just stick to lessons. So a lot of these are straight out of the PPP manual that we recognize, so everybody doesn't have to learn them again. It's important to de-risk your project as far as possible before you even engage with a potential SPV or go to market. The reason is SPVs, private party, they would be very happy to price every risk that you want to give them. But some of the risks is more expensive for them to deal with than for government itself. And we've recognized that. And on our project, I mean, we are creating a greenfield. So some of the clearing of the site, demolishing of buildings, stuff like going to the municipality and getting approvals, doing site reports, those kind of things we've recognized. If we do those things up front, then we can focus on the stuff that the private party can do cheaper than us, where they can be innovative, and those risks we want to transfer to them. I think that's a very important point. So that means that you really, really need to understand your project very intimately, which also brings me to the point that you cannot just rely on your transaction advisor to do everything. Interestingly enough, that also came out in the market sounding, is that the market sounding participants wanted to pick up if the government and the government team who's working on the project actually has got intimate knowledge in what's going on, and don't just rely on the transaction advisor to run with the project. So very important point. And we even thought about lessons that we are yet still to learn. So I've got 2 of them there at the bottom. There's a few more, but I want to mention these 2. And that is, we recognize that there could be a change in affordability. Now, as you would know, during your feasibility study, you test value for money, and affordability and bankability of the project. And we are aware that these things might change over time. So we keep an eye on them. We don't want to get to the end and suddenly Treasury says, "Ooh, hang on, guys, your project is no longer value for money." And also another lesson that we anticipate is the fact that once we've procured a private party, it's not just hands off and leave it over to them, but we need to transform our existing office into a team that's got a capacity to manage the process going forward, and to look after the project for the next 20 years during the concession period. Okay, Dr. Pillay, I think that it brings me to the end. I'm going to say thank you to you, and I hope I didn't go too much over time. I did. I love talking about my project.
Thank you, Thorpe. Thank you for sharing this exciting project with us. It seems that the regulations are working for you, but we'll test that with our participants. I now want to invite our final panelist, George Kanyeka. George is a Chief Director at the Infrastructure Management and Economic Services at the KZN Provincial Treasury. He's a professional architect by training, and he's also spent some time in the classroom. So, George, welcome to you. Please share with us your project in KZN, the Halbert Lutuli Hospital. Quite a mature project, and hopefully we can learn some lessons from your implementation. Over to you, George.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to switch off my camera. Thank you very much for being a part of this very exciting series. I will pull up my presentation. Where are we now? Okay. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, please proceed.
Good afternoon, everyone in the series this afternoon. I just want to thank you very much for availing yourselves to listen to us discuss some of the very important projects that we're undertaking in the province. As you all know, Inkosi Albert Lutuli Central Hospital, PPP, is a pathfinder project in the sense that it has led the way in terms of PPPs. One, how they're conceptualized, implemented, and then managed. We managed to go through a 15-year cycle and got to the end of the first phase. And after that phase, we've had to transition to a new phase. But in between, there was a break. That break was then characterized by extension. So in this presentation here, I'll just give you some background to the entire PPP as it is. I'll go through the various elements that made this PPP work. We'll look at some of the elements that made it particularly successful. But we also, with everything, there are challenges that can be discerned. We will look at some of the challenges, and then now we've transitioned to the new phase of the PPP and to where we are right now. Just a brief background on the PP itself. Again, it responds to strategic imperatives both at the provincial and national level. It started in 2002, but this is the second phase, like I mentioned. It's a partnership between KZN Department of Health and the private consortium led by Impilo Consortium. It's called Impilo Consortium 2. The first phase was run by a company called Impilo. Procurement of the next phase, there's been a significant retention of part of the team. that was in the first appointment. So hence the name Imperial Consortium 2. The structure of the PPP is such that there is a separation between the clinical services and the non-clinical services. So government stays with the clinical side of things, and we focus on the facilities management, the medical equipment, and the information management and technology, and obviously providing the maintenance of the entire facility, as it were. When you go back to how this whole project started, when the physical structure was being finalized, there were obviously issues about how to run this. If you're going to make it a quaternary facility, what were you going to be looking at? And obviously, the PPP model came into play to say if we needed cutting-edge technology and cutting-edge service, we needed to involve the private sector as much as possible. And obviously, through that approach, KZN Health at the time procured the services of PricewaterhouseCoopers, and they appointed the Chief Financial Officer of Health at the time, Mr. Henran Eman Conradi, as the project officer. Procurement followed, but obviously there were some definitions that were made. Firstly, that the department would need a partner to provide the equipment, information management and technology, IM&T, and then the private party would also be in charge of maintaining and repairing equipment, replacing it in due course, either out of obsolescence or advancement in technology, and to ensure that all the technology remains current. This really needed a lot of exhaustive examination to be able to look at how an entire facility, such as a quaternary facility as envisioned, could function. So it did take quite a lot of exhaustive work, and it laid down the groundwork for a few assumptions that were made into the contract to say we're going to have a 15-year contract with 5-year refresh cycles for equipment. And in that contract, again, there was a 3-year refresh cycles for IT. So all of these are rigid approaches that say we need cutting-edge technology. We are going to refresh the technology as it should be refreshed, and at set intervals, and that's what was embedded in the contract. And then, as part of the project closeout requirements, it was expected that the closeout report that was going to come out was then going to talk about the lessons learned, what had happened in the contract that had come to an end, and therefore how were we going to procure the next phase. Unfortunately, we'll talk about that transition. That closeout didn't happen as well as it should have happened. In general, the performance of the first phase was exceptionally good, and as I said earlier on, it's been one of the most successful PPPs in the country, actually, for Pathfinder, when it comes to health. And what distinguishes it very much so is that it delivered a high quality service. And when you look at what we're trying to achieve as government in terms of socio-economic objectives, these were achieved. Particularly important in PPPs, it's the issue of transfer of risk, and risk in this case was significantly transferred. So when you talk about getting your service providers to perform, again, they were incentivized to perform. And also one thing that helped the institution as well was that this PPP separated the institution as a clear, focused hospital, which is a specialist hospital. So we didn't have district services encroaching on the, primary healthcare encroaching on the services here. So you got this specialized institution, then you got all these technically sound service standards, and you can only have something that is very successful. There are certain areas that we can pick out as the key success factors that happened. If we look at the strong integration of infrastructure versus equipment and versus the ICT. That integration, once you get it going and you get it right, it works well for you. For instance, if you look at the seamless integration that was happening between the medical equipment, that's the IT systems, electronic patient records, and physical infrastructure, and you look at the clinicians operating in that sense, and you look at what happens when you get equipment interacting with the technology, you get clinical efficiency there. The patient management becomes just an incredible level, and you've got a lot of data to deal with because you've got cutting edge technology to work with. At the time, actually, when this institution got online, I want to call it, for one or better word, when it got online, this was literally cutting edge, and there was nobody else doing something like that. Again, another thing that worked very well with this PPP is that it had the performance-based contract with enforceable KPIs. So the private partner had a clear sense of the detailed specifications that were given to them. So the clear sense of what government wanted from them, and they had to perform in strict accordance with those performance indicators. So that really helped. As a result of that, the equipment was functioning all the time, the facility was clean, and the reliability of service was top-notch. And again, another function that doesn't happen a lot in a typical procurement, in this instance, we have the whole life asset management. We're looking at the procurement of an asset from procurement to disposal. There was a whole process that said there was going to be value attached to this whole process, and private partner took care of all of those things. As a result of that, you found that assets were well maintained and were consistently functional. We did not have a situation which we have typically in the public sector where we defer maintenance. At the time of the inception of the contract, the consortium included a few international firms with strong technical partners that gave the whole PPPs a strong edge, and it was able to function at levels close to private sector standards, sometimes even better. And then also it created a very good reputation. Now, when you have a good reputation, you get strong stakeholder support, you get political and public legitimacy. And this has led to this project being recognized, and therefore us being seen as a Pathfinder project. So that's really one of the things that one wants to be proud of, that you're part of such a remarkable project. But again, sometimes you want to acknowledge that, yes, you did perform very well, but arising out of that strong performance, sometimes you do get some negative spins from that. Not that they're negative, but then they make you pause and reflect on how you're going to transition from that excellent performance to the next phase, as you transition from the finished phase to the next phase. So if you look at some of the things that happened, if you look at the success factors, for instance, full life cycle outsourcing, where the private sector is taking care of the entire asset from acquisition and to disposal. The public sector does not have such a close view of what's happening in there, so it becomes very expensive. And then you're using high-end equipment, state-of-the-art equipment, that does come with a price. At the end of the day, in the long run, it becomes unaffordable. And then remember, when you're transferring risk, the more risk you transfer, the more premiums you're going to pay. So the higher risk transfer came with the higher cost premium. And then we talk about an integrated system. If you're working with an integrated system, you're talking about your software, your hardware being interconnected with the medical equipment. And if you're going to change any one of these items, that means you have to refresh all the other items, even though they had not reached their end of life. So that reduced flexibility in the system. So yes, it is working. Yes, it's performing very well. But at the end of the day, it brings back questions that ask you to take a pause as you do the transition. So one of the things that didn't go right for us as we're beginning now to do an introspection to say, we're coming to an end, 2017's year, we're done. As we're trying to envision how to move forward, we're doing these extensions in between. But obviously, having to go through a lot of the issues that I mentioned. Life cycle costs were very high. They could be high, of course, because the private sector is building in an issue of obsolescence in the equipment that they are acquiring. And then obviously there's the issue of technology upgrade. Technology is always upgrading, and the private sector had to constantly keep abreast with technological upgrades, but that comes at a cost, which then translated in a very high unitary cost. And there's a lesson to be learned from there. The problem with the gap that we had when we ended the contract in 2017 and starting the new one that started officially in 2024 is that there was no solid platform to transition from the old to the new. And that weakened the state's ability to be able to bargain and get a proper deal going in place. And at the same time, it must be understood that when we were transitioning, obviously there was an issue with how the market was going to respond to taking over this new phase. So the market appetite in that case would be quite restricted because there's a perception that the incumbent has got an advantage over the market that might be wanting to come board. So therefore, you get a smaller market coming in. It doesn't give you a lot of room for engagement or for negotiation. You end up in a very, very complex procurement process. As I've mentioned, because you're dealing with very expensive technology, your refresh rate is high, the technology, built-in obsolescence, and all these costs do arise and do come and follow you. You have to look, therefore, at how to deal with those costs. How was government going to make this project viable and sustainable so that it can continue? So there was a multi-year affordability challenge. When value engineering was done, at the time, the unitary payments annually were around the 1 billion mark. And when value engineering was done, it was coming down to about 844 million annually. Now, you must bear in mind that you're working with a fiscal that is shrinking, so our annual budgets are not increasing anywhere. So you have a constrained fiscal, and you have and you have to worry about how much you can invest in one institution, how you can get it going, so that you don't lose out on the gains that you've made. So there was an issue to do a deep dive. Now, doing a deep dive meant that we as government had to sit down and do a rigorous exercise of trying to see where we could make potential savings. And obviously in the various components, savings were identified. For instance, facilities management, savings were identified to the tune of about 340 million. How was that done? So the whole idea was to begin to step back a bit from some of the standards that were prescribed and begin to look at a different approach. For instance, we're using what we call a gold standard, age-based asset replacement approach. Now you're saying this is what we need, and it's done. This so many years it's done. We need something on the similar value and similar price, done. But when we're saying, hang on a minute, let's look at the condition. Is this asset in a condition that it can render service? Let's perhaps go in that direction. Then you begin to look at more optimizing maintenance schedules, such as your HVAC, your lifts. You start getting benefits there. And then you go again to information management technology. Again, there were some savings that were identified there, specifically having to do with fit-for-purpose hardware recalibration. After all of these line-by-line assessments of all the things that were needed, technology-wise, hardware-wise, software-wise, all of these items, assessing each and every one of them, fit for purpose, relevant, available for use, we were able then to begin to see areas where we could significantly reduce the costs. At the end of the day, when you're reducing these costs, you're saying, I still want to retain the benefits in the excellent service that I was able to render. I still want to do the same thing, to still
George, we're unable to hear you. Yeah, I think George was thrown out of the chat, but I think he's come to the end of his presentation. So colleagues, this moves us into the Q&A discussion, and hopefully George will be able to join us shortly. I'd like to propose that we take the questions verbally. We take maybe several rounds of 3 colleagues, please direct your questions to the relevant panel members. And we will also go to the Q&A. And Marty, can you assist us just manage that process? If we can just identify the first 3 participants that would like to interact with our panel.
Dr. Pillay, Gugu Moyo can now ask the question. You can take over.
Please go ahead.
Afternoon, Doc. Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you clearly. Please go
Okay.
ahead.
Thanks. I do have a couple of questions, and perhaps the first one is generic. I'm quite interested in the courses that you talk about. So perhaps towards the end, maybe you could just give an outline as to what it is that you offer through PPP Online. To the colleague at Western Cape, I don't know if they are willing to divulge, but what were their findings when they looked into potential financiers in terms of local finance versus international potential funders? Was there a difference in terms of how what the market was willing to offer? Is the one potentially cheaper than the other? And then to the colleague from KZN, I was just noted that the regional laundry was excluded from the PPP. Is that perhaps an opportunity for the future? Is it not something that would typically be handed over to a private party to handle, given that it's such a service-driven function? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Gugu. Can we take another participant? Marty, can you assist us?
At the moment, there's no more hands, but there's a question in the Q&A.
Let's take that in the meantime.
So it's a question to Andre. Andre, if you can respond to that question.
Yes, I will do that. Thank you, Marty. Thank you, Morgan. So it's a question from Leslie, asking a question about the creation of sufficient, proper hospitals in rural areas, compared to cities where we've got a lot of people that go to these hospitals, etc., etc. So the question from Leslie, if I can summarize it, was what should government do to provide hospital services in rural areas? And maybe I can use, let me first respond in general. So when government want to develop what we call accommodation type projects, and accommodation type projects in the PPP space mean hospitals, prisons, police stations, office accommodation, all sort of brick and mortar type facilities are captured under accommodation. So the principles that I will reflect on is relevant to all accommodation projects. So should government, and most of these projects are social orientated. They are not income generating projects. So what governments typically do is they, let me use a rural area in Northwest Province, the Brits Maribeng area. A big area, many people living in and around the Maribeng municipality, and they need new hospitals. Well, government, the Northwest Province did build a public sector hospital in Brits Maribeng. I am unsure about the timing, let's say 10 years ago, but it's a traditional procured hospital. And it's Northwest Province staff also servicing the hospital. So if they want to extend that services, there's probably not enough money available or budget available in the Northwest Province. And one way then to deal with that is for the province, or maybe the BFI funding, or maybe the infrastructure fund, the National Infrastructure Fund, to contribute viability gap funding. So let's assume the cost of such new hospital will be 500 million rand. The province can contribute from their own budget viability gap funding, or a grant in general terms, let's say of 100, and hopefully through BFI or the infrastructure fund, they can contribute another 100 or 200. It means that the private sector can then design, build maintain and possibly operate the hospital over a long period of time. And the fee structure required, or the availability fee, because the Northwest Province will pay an availability fee as long as the hospital is available in a certain condition, equipment operating at a certain condition, the province will pay an availability fee to the private sector. But it will lower the availability fee that governments need to pay if there is viability gap funding or grant funding. Another term that people are maybe more familiar with is blended finance. So you can blend your project by bringing in money that will not require repayment, grants, or maybe even low interest rate, soft loans, to bring that in. So Leslie, it can be done. There are examples, and the names are just escaping me. 2 rural hospitals alongside the N1 route. I think one is maybe alongside Frankfurt area. That was initially planned as a PPP. Maybe somebody online know what the outcome of that project was. But there were 2 projects, and it had to deal specifically with major accidents on the N1. And then that government wanted to have hospitals closer to the N1 to also cater for the towns as well as for accident victims on that road. So yeah, so grant funding is the way to support these projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. Thorpe, Gugu had a question for you as well. Please come in.
Thank you, Dr. Pillay. Yes, I can actually shed some light on both, on 2 of them. Let me start with adding a bit more of a practical thing from the primary, delivering healthcare services to primary. In our case, it would be rural communities and so forth. You know, we became very good at procuring healthcare infrastructure, primary healthcare structure in our traditional way. We've got, in fact, very well at building clinics in rural areas and so forth. And that, I think, over the last couple of decades, that has been a focus. And if you come down to the Western Cape, you'll see that we've got state-of-the-art, stunning primary healthcare facilities that does indeed bring healthcare services to the people. However, we also find there's a increasing burden of disease at the older end of the population. We're starting to see more things like diabetics, oncology issues, and so forth. And we are still sitting with central hospitals and academic hospitals with tertiary services, which was built 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, which is why we are looking at expanding that approach. Now, in that you mentioned with the PPP work for that, look, PPPs generally, if it's a PFI, doesn't fit very small projects. You look at it for bigger projects. Now, if you were to look at an individual clinic, I think you'd struggle suitability for that. However, it's interesting, you could look at a program. So yeah, I think thanks for raising that. That's food for thought. So you're also giving us something to think about. Then I want to answer your question on the market sounding that we did with the financiers. Now, interesting, you segregate them between local and foreign, and you ask whether the one is better than the other one. Can I just say that in South Africa, we've got an extremely well-developed banking system, and it totally showed during our market sounding. I mean, if you look at our banks, I think other countries come and learn from us. So no, foreign was not cheaper. In fact, their values landed pretty close to each other, which also gave us some confidence. What I can tell you, what was interesting is that foreign participants had a bit of a longer view, especially ones from Europe and so forth. They had a longer view that they wanted to take, and maybe it's because they were slightly more pension funds and so forth, and that's the nature of their business. Yeah, but no, I think, and then also we're not too prescriptive, because remember, it's not directly our financiers. It is financiers that will be sourced by the SPV. So the SPV would go out and they would blend their finance and balance their debt equity ratios and do all the negotiation with their financiers and so forth. So yeah. I think due to some confidentiality that we had, I think that's about as far as I can go with feedback on that. Thank you. Thanks, Morgan.
Thank you, Thorpe. I see George is back with us. George, did you get the tail end of that question? Or do you want to just complete what you were talking about in your presentation?
Hi, Morgan. Sorry, man. I've had a power outage, something that I should have mitigated earlier on. So I don't even know where I got cut off. It's a bit difficult for me to say. If I don't know, if might be able to look at my presentation and point out where I could have been cut off.
I think it
maybe
was
we
at
can
the
answer
second last slide. Yeah, we've moved to the question and answer session. So if you didn't get Gugu's question, and let's proceed and see if other colleagues have more comments. I know, Gugu, you asked me about the PPP training we're running. We are running a PPP training program as part of the ITAS delivery. So we're focusing on the foundation phase, preparation and execution. And we're really focusing on practitioners that are actually running these projects in various locations. So if you fall into that category, maybe you can get in touch with us. Marty, can you help us with further Q&A or if there's a hand up?
There's a second Q&A question for Thorpe. Thorpe, I'm not sure if you're able to read it. To what extent has the configuration of Takeberg Hospital into a mixed-use urban development stimulated investor interest and enabled the identified urban area proposed hospital extent to accommodate diverse anchors beyond purely clinical functions? So that was for Thorpe.
Okay, great. So Thorpe, maybe come in. It's quite a detailed question around the entire redevelopment proposal, but take us through the thinking behind it.
I'm just trying to see who asked the question. It's I'm struggling a bit to understand the question.
56703. So under Q&A, you will see question number 2.
Yes. So, okay, I'm seeing this. All right, I'm going to interpret reconfiguration into the mixed urban development. So it's all about commercial opportunity and also moving into accommodate diverse function beyond. Yeah, so I'm not too involved in those, but we are reimagining the campus to extend to commercial opportunities. We are engaging with a higher institution in terms of what is possible in the academic field, research field, and then our output specifications for our SPV also allows them to offer some services. I mean, we're talking about catering and public catering and stuff like that. So at this stage, that is still fairly in an option situation where we are looking at various options and seeing what is more feasible. But it's important that whatever we bring to campus and how we integrate into more wide commercial opportunities needs to be aligned with our vision of creating a medical hub. And we're very amicable to that. So yeah, open to those kind of things. So I don't see your name, but I hope I've answered your question at least a bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Thorpe. Marty, are there further questions and comments in the chat box, or if somebody has their hands up?
There's a hand raised, so let's give that person an opportunity. I'm going to allow them to speak. Busetsu.
Please come in. I think Marty has opened the microphone.
Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I would like to ask, with regarding to the Western Cape, the Tygerberg Hospital, I see the HT was not included in the Triple P. I want to understand how the whole acquisition and the management of the HT is going to be handled. If the department has their own asset management strategy, and why they thought it would be more costly if it was based under the Triple P contract. And then I think more provinces seem to be more inclined to use Triple Ps. So I don't know if it's is it because of unsolicited bids that come in, or is it just the provinces themselves that are willing to fund the feasibility studies? Because from what I've seen, that there has to be a willingness to fund a feasibility study before you can even decide to go into a Triple P. And I see that as a problem for some provinces or some regions. So I'm trying to understand where the blockage might be for some provinces that has been overcome by others. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So, Thorpe, can you deal with the HT question, the organization and the management thereof? And then I'm going to
I can
ask
even
Andre.
touch on the second one as well. Sorry, what was the lady's name? I missed her name. My dear, what was your name?
We can't see that on the screen.
Okay, never
But
mind.
I think,
Okay,
but
my name is Pusetso. Pusetso.
Okay, Mtsetso,
Okay,
thank you
got
for
it.
that question. Both very good questions. So when we did the feasibility study, right, we recognized things that is more expensive and less expensive, and which risks we can transfer. And I think I did touch on how we try to de-risk the project. So that was one of the parameters, is to not include HT in the PPP. Now that is not a problem. That means just that it's just one of the aspects that you can do more, let's say, cost effectively in-house. So we have a HT directorate inside our infrastructure chief directorate, which is extremely well developed. They've got great procurement capacity. And they've been built over many years with storage facility, officials, specifications, and so forth. So in-house, we have a strong capacity to do that. And that is one of the reasons why our HT is more feasible to do in-house and not to let the private party does. We think that cost could creep in. I think George encapsulated it very well. Over time, life cycle costs can become very expensive when you outsource HT. So that was one of the reasons. And we don't see the integration as a problem. Well, look, I mean, integrating would have its challenges, of course, but we don't see it as a problem. So it's being developed on the side. We have also got BFI funding available to procure our HT. And then we simply incorporate it into our commissioning process. So in other words, our equipment will be installed at the appropriate time when the building is ready for it. So it shouldn't create too much conflict if you do it in a well-planned way. Yeah, thanks for that question. Can I just say your second question on the procurement and why I think not for small clinics and so forth. Remember, PPP is, you should see it as purely a procurement process. It is a choice of how to procure the infrastructure by government. So either we can procure things in our traditional way, or we can procure it through a PPP. Now, there's pros and cons on both. And when we look at which projects fit which, there is reasons why PPP would be a preferred route, and reasons why it would not be a preferred route. And I think the PPP manual explains that pretty well. So if you want to read up on it, it's well worth the read. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go to Andre. Andre, the question was about why more provinces are using PPPs? And is this because of unsolicited bids? Maybe you want to tell us from your experience.
Yeah, so I'll take an educated guess of why. Well, in general, maybe I can throw it open. I think South Africa, because of a lack of liquidity, of a lack of solvability. I mean, long term, we are having large problems. I think the last announcement, debt to GDP, was at 78%. Remember, the IMF target is set at 55%. So that's the reason why we are now going into the PPP space. And just this point, it's the weakest part of the economic cycle that we are now trying to do PPPs. They will be much more expensive now. Let me turn it around. It will be much more affordable when we're in a strong financial position. That's when you do PPPs. But we don't have another choice now. So that is the opportunity now, as Thorpe said. We've got the opportunity to consider procuring certain projects on a PPP basis. So I would guess, if we have hospitals, and I just want to extend the answer a little bit, moving into the small space. There was also a question from a colleague on examples of PPPs. And let me start with an area where grouping of projects is not so easy. That is in the municipal space. So if we've got cities close to each, towns close to each other, and both 3-4 of them are not having functional wastewater treatment plants, theoretically the answer is to develop a regional plant on a PPP basis. Make the projects 500 million plus from a capex value, because that's more or less the lower end of a PPP project in South Africa. At least 8 years ago, it was 500 million. But areas that you can develop group PPPs is hospitals, because that we do not have a municipal sphere of government looking after health. Is a provincial competency. So within Gauteng, within the next province, we can develop a smaller group hospitals across different towns, because your procurement authority is the same procurement authority. So some examples, just to add to that, in the big world out there, would be schools. You would know that in Gauteng, a few years ago, 3, 4, 5 years ago, we had a shortage of 80 schools, 80 plus schools. That was going to be resolved by procuring schools on a PPP basis. Unfortunately, for various reasons, it did not help. It did not happen. And the province procured on a traditional basis, make it 15 or 16 schools, if I listened to one of our other colleagues recently. Other areas, interestingly, you will have seen that Joburg Metro announced that they have got an arrears maintenance of 40-odd billion rand on bridges. We could do bridges on a group basis. We've got some nice examples worldwide whereby the private sector gets allocated. And maybe just to make this point, when we award a project to the private sector in a PPP mode, we only award them the economic rights. The legal rights of the hospital, of the road, of the Tshwane House, the metropolitan offices is a PPP. The private sector don't own the building. They only are responsible for the economic rights. So maybe enough about that. Thank you, Morgan.
Thank you, Andre. Marty, can you tell us if there's further inputs?
Yes, there's another hand. Sabelu, I'm going to allow you.
Afternoon, colleagues.
Good
My
afternoon.
question is to you, Doctor. I just want to follow up on the question that was raised by one of the colleagues earlier on regarding the training. How far does it go? You said you do the foundation phase. Do you go all the way down to certification and accreditation for PPPs? The other question is it only limited to health sector? I'm asking that because I'm coming from the water and sanitation background. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. It's the training that we are providing is fairly limited. The numbers that we can take are limited because of budgetary constraints, etc. But we are focusing on the foundation course and we will move towards the preparation, which is slightly advanced, dealing with the planning of the project, and then finally the execution, which looks at the legal aspects and the implementation. And we are focusing largely on practitioners that are in different sectors that are implementing PPPs. The course is a World Bank course. It's accredited by APMG. And maybe, Andre, given our limitations, maybe you want to come in and just talk about the accreditation and the certification that goes with this training. It seems that a lot of people are interested in this. Thank you.
Thank you, Morgan. And thank you for the question as well. So the course name, the program name is Certified PPP Professional, developed by the World Bank, now managed on behalf of the World Bank by APMG. And you could make use of an accredited training provider to study the courses. PPP training online, our company does that as well, and we deliver all three courses: foundation, preparation course, as well as execution course. In the ITAF program, we are now just about starting in April with the preparation course. And there's a good cohort of people that have passed the exams on the foundation, and they are moving on. And Morgan, if you will allow me, in PPP training space, PPP training online space, we are planning a major Africa water initiative in Cape Town from 5 to 8 May. So I would suggest if the colleague is interested, he can either email us or connect with us, and we can provide. So the whole idea is you would know that water is a major issue Africa-wide, worldwide. We know that the negative impact of water insecurity is up to 6% negative GDP. So with 80% plus of our municipalities being dysfunctional, it's a major hindrance of the economy growing. So we can't get the economy growing if we don't fix municipalities and water utilities. But enough about that, maybe. Thank you, Morgan.
Thank you, Andre. Marty, can you help us with any further comments, questions from the box or from Hansa?
Some questions in the Q&A. So what is the average period to run through the whole process until the facility is handed over to the user? This question comes from Mandla, and he has a second question also, the grouping of small facilities. Do you have a case study on the grouping?
Okay, thank you, Marty. So on the average time from conception to delivery, I'm going to ask Thorpe and George to talk about their experiences, because it seems that this may be different for different sectors, different types of projects. And then, Andre, you've introduced this concept about grouping of small projects. So we're going to turn to you to tell us how this could possibly work. Thorpe, please come in.
Hi, thank you, Doctor. You ask how long, and how long is a piece of string is the question. Ours is taking quite long. We've registered our PPP in 2012 already, our project as a PPP. There's been some delays. We got stuck a bit over COVID. So we took a bit of a long lead getting to the point where we are now, where we finalizing our specifications so that we're getting ready to approach the market and go to market. I did see there was a question.
Before you proceed, you said you registered the PPP in 2012. How many years before that did you plan?
Sorry, how many years before that?
Before the registration of the PPP, how many years of planning before that, before you could register it?
Well, that was really the kickoff of the project. I mean, we had CSR do an evaluation on our building, and we recognized that we had to do something. But I think it got formalized in 2012 to start as a PPP once we registered with National Treasury to run as a PPP. That's when only after that we got our transaction advisor, and only after that we started with a PPP office. So it really only started then, but it doesn't have to take that long. Look, the reason I'm saying is how long is a piece of string is because there's also political will. There's also capacity in the department. So there's a lot of things that needs to be put in place, which in our case was not in place for a long time, or had to be restarted from previous PPPs. But it can happen a lot quicker. A PPP is different from a traditional procurement because it adds extra layers of due diligence that's being done, for instance, by the financiers into a SPV and so forth. And those things, if it's being done, if the paving is being built good time, like for instance in our case, but then after that it could happen quicker. So in our project, I had the timelines up there. We envisage going to market by April of next year, which means we can start construction by beginning of 2029. If it's a 4-year construction period, which is what we're aiming for, it means we can deliver the hospital in 2033 and commission our service. And then, of course, you've got the concession period during which the private party will give us services. And that duration depends entirely on the way in which you structure your finance of your project. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Thorpe. George, do you want to talk about the KZN example and the time framework there?
Thanks, Morgan. I think in terms of how the Inkosi Albert Lutuli Hospital PPP evolved, it's slightly different in the sense that we're already in the construction of the facility. And as we're coming close to the conclusion of the facility, then the issue of operationalization and attending this specialist hospital came into being. And when those issues started coming into being, then the issue became, how do we procure the equipment? How do we procure everything that we need to be able to meet this facility of a particular standard? And then the PPP procurement option came in. So that one was not a typical from start to operationalization sort of approach. So it is different in that sense. So we're talking about from when we commissioned the facility to start operating the facility. Be that as it may, typically speaking, obviously based on the experience that we're having with other facilities, we're looking at one facility we're trying to do in the province ourselves. It's a precinct, a government precinct. We're trying to get all government offices into one place. It's taken forever. There are various reasons that account for that. There's also another project that has been brought on board by Public Works. They're trying to do to revitalize more or less a derelict government building, which has enormous potential. But again, the problem becomes, are you going to do this as a PPP because you want to create office space for government, or you want to get value out of the property? Then that gives you the various options of how you should do it. So if I can look at that particular option, if I was saying, I want to take government from the offices that they're renting and then put them in that property, I'll use the current rentals to redevelop that place and run it going forward. It's unlikely to be sustainable. So I have to do a lot of studies. So I think the biggest issue I find is to be able to create a project pipeline, the project pipeline that is anchored in pre-feasibility and feasibility studies. When that part of our work is done, then the rest will almost invariably be quicker. The fact that we don't do exhaustive studies, like I mentioned in this particular case, I just picked it up randomly. If we do our work exhaustively, by the time we're getting to the procurement option, should be much quicker. The plan is really where the biggest problem is. As you can imagine, right now in KZN, our project pipeline, if we're talking with our friends from GTAC, they see a long project pipeline. In KZN Treasury, our PPP unit is gearing itself up to be able to support particularly the municipal sector where there's a lot of activity. We find that people have got a wish list, but how can we
I think we've lost George, but Andre, the second part of Manla's question talked about this grouping of smaller projects. You've introduced the concept, so maybe you want to elaborate on how this could be practically operated.
Yeah, thank you, Morgan. Yeah, so there are quite a number of examples. Not all of them in South Africa. We find that institutions in South Africa are very sort of holding their issues close to their chest and don't easily share. So what this means is that, and that's why the hospital space is ideal, because you've got the provincial government hospital health responsibility, so it's one entity. So there's numerous case studies available in this space. I've used now health and schools and bridges. Even streetlights are also termed as group PPPs. We find cities with 30,000 streetlights being handed over to the private sector. Joburg Metro actually did the whole PPP feasibility on streetlights. They just, wrong decision, but they decided not to proceed with handing over streetlights. Yeah, so there's a significant number of examples across different sectors. But then obviously the important point that I think I try to highlight is it's the institutional integration that you need to do. So if it becomes practical tomorrow, let me use this example. Umgeni Water is looking at seeing if they may be appointed by municipalities to take over the delivery role, and maybe if they take 3, 4, 5 of those in physically close to each other, maybe Umgeni Water can act as the authority to procure private parties to either build a new regional plant or to refurbish the current plants in small towns. Yeah, so it has not been done in the water board space, because the water boards, as you know, are also in big trouble because municipalities haven't paid them. So we are also currently in discussions with National Treasury, where they are pulling their hair out, not knowing how to resolve this impasse we have. But surely, as South Africans, we are innovative. I'm sure we will find an opportunity and make a plan to make it work. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Marty. Can we take another question or hand?
Yes, there's actually 2 for Andre. So the first one is from Fekade. I think that the main reason for the private sector to go to PPPs is ultimately profit. How can quality of care be maintained and regulated in PPP hospitals compared to public hospitals? How this is to be regulated?
In one of the points that I made in my presentation, there was a note about independent regulation. So if I can deal with that last part of the question, so thank you for that question. So we need independent regulation in the health space. That will help. That will go a long way. But just getting back to the profit notion of the private sector. When government enter into a PPP with the private sector, they in effect approve a profit margin for the private sector. So I'll take you quickly through the steps. So when a government entity, like what Thorpe is doing and what the team that George's lead have done, is they've developed a feasibility study and they have tested the market. They've done market testing. Thorpe referred to market testing, market sounding, and they've got a fair idea of what the private sector will ask, a fair idea of the net present value that the private sector will put together the day they bid for the project. They've got a very good idea. So the moment they then appoint a private sector bidder, they get the full, well, before they appoint, they get the full financial model of the private sector that also indicate the profit margins. It indicates the IRR that the private sector will want to earn over the life of the project. So when government approve that transaction and they enter into a PPP contract with the private sector, government fully well know what is the IRR the private sector targets over the life of the project. Different from traditional procurement, where government doesn't have a clue. And it's not because government is bad, it's just the way traditional procurement is managed. Government accept the lowest offer or the second lowest offer or whatever is appropriate, and you don't have an idea if the profit margin is 200%. So in PPPs, you've got much better control over the profit margin. And if I can take it one step further, in South Africa, in our standardized PPP contracts, there's a clause that if the private sector earns income more than the targeted IRR, government share 50-50 in the upside. So, to close this, this part of the discussion, governments want the private sector to be successful. They want them to earn their IRR. They actually want them to earn more than their IRR, because then government can share in the upside. So it's not something that everybody is aware of, but it's a very powerful motivator for government through, Thorpe referred to a penalty regime, penalty systems, performance-based systems. So government wants the private sector to be successful, perform well, and earn their returns, and even more because of the sharing concept. Thank you.
Thank you. Marty, can we take the last question?
So there's a question from Leslie. There are numerous hospitals, medical facilities, PPPs that have failed or not met objectives across the continent and even in South Africa. And then have we, public and private sector, learned the lessons from these? What are they?
Okay. Andre, maybe we start with you. Just share your thoughts on what has worked, what has not worked, and why, particularly in the health sector.
Yes, and I'll directly go to the Queen Mabatu, I may not pronounce it correctly, hospital in Lesotho, where government cancelled the project for convenience, meaning government decided that they do not want to proceed with the PPP. Now, what you should know is that the moment government says that, the moment they move into that step, I'll get to the reasons now. The moment they do that, they need to pay the private sector as if the project has run its full course. So if it was a 30-year project, the private sector had an IRR, a target of 18%, government must pay them that amount. And typically that's not budgeted for. So I can tell you, this is maybe not that public knowledge, there's currently a court case because the government of Lesotho has not paid the private sector. And it's a major negative for any future PPPs in Southern Africa. The fact that a government is not following contractual obligations. So that's one aspect to it. In that project, there's very good case studies. There's probably 3, 4, 5 case studies that has been developed over time by different parties. Some of them from a private view, public view. So maybe the short answer here is there's very good material for anybody developing a new health PPP to learn from. I should just stop there because the detail is just too much. Yeah.
So, but I think Leslie raises the point about when these projects start, there's a set of objectives. And at the end of that period, many of these projects do not make it. Thorpe, George, do you want to express your views on that?
I can. I don't have intimate knowledge of ones that's failed, like Andre just mentioned. But I mean, like I mentioned, we did take lessons learned from other PPPs, like we spoke about the HT thing that we learned from Albert Lutuli. We also did our own PPP at Lentegeur Hospital, which is a soft services PPP where we got a lot of lessons learned from. So it seems like we learned more from the ones that's working than the ones that we don't hear of that fail. That's an interesting question. One of the things that I can tell you is that by the time when you sign the contract, you need to not fail. That is extremely important. So you have to do your homework absolutely exceptionally, because once you're locked into that agreement, it's like Andre said, if things go wrong, it could become very costly. Yeah, so that's from my side. Thank you.
George, are you back with us?
Yes, I am back. About to change position in the house. get closer to my inverter and all of that. Sorry about that connection issue. Look, I think for me, the experience that we've had so far, it's of a winning project, and it's a working PPP that we're all happy about. So I haven't had any interaction with a failed PPP, but what we are having interaction with struggling projects that people are trying to procure traditionally or through PPPs. And we're finding that we're going to be interfacing a lot with people who ought to be looking at possibly true-bred PPPs or hybrid PPPs. And I think we're going to have a lot of engagements with people, institutions, and departments. Already we've had an engagement with a municipality, I won't mention their name. They started developing an office block using the equitable share, which is unsustainable. And what we're saying to them is, going as a PPP, you need to understand the fundamentals and the principles of why you want to do it. It's a procurement option. It's not a way that you're going to be utilizing your offices. So let's just take you backwards a bit, and let's walk you through how you can procure completion of that facility and start utilizing it. So I think that's the space we're seeing. And again, like I said earlier on, I think a lot of people need to understand how to acquire infrastructure and utilize it. I think for us, then that will help us to quicken the procurement through PPPs. At the moment, I think we're really at the beginning. We're at the beginning of the phase of trying to get people into understanding a project pipeline from which you can get feasible projects, which you can then sell to the private sector. If you don't have a credible project pipeline, there will be nothing to sell. Sorry, I didn't have much to say about that. That's about the best I can say.
Thank you, George. Colleagues, we have to bring this webinar to a close. But before we do that, I just want to ask our panelists. We started this webinar where I raised two myths. The first was, are PPPs a form of privatization that undermines public control of health services? The second one, are PPPs too expensive and only suitable for large, wealthy projects? And I'm going to give you 2 minutes for each of the panel members just to give us your response on that. Andre, let's start with you.
Thank you, Morgan, for that. In one of my earlier responses, I just commented on the fact that in PPPs, the private sector does not get legal ownership. So you can test that, you can check that for the Tshwane House office accommodation PPP, the legal owner is Johannesburg. So I'll just stop with that one. So PPPs are not equal to privatization. Privatization is when you give away your legal ownership. Then on the notion of being expensive, in every PPP, during the feasibility, and I think Thorpe and George referred to that, you would do your calculations of income, expenditure, available money. You will do affordability tests. And you only do a PPP when the private sector can deliver the project at a lower cost over the life of the project than if government was developing. So there's a test. There's a financial model that you develop. Maybe just necessary to say this, the financial model is not the be-all because it's based on assumptions and you may get some of the assumptions wrong. So when you make your decision as a government authority, you base it on the public sector comparator model, and you take also into account the socio-economic requirements. And many times the socio-economic requirements will carry a bigger weight, and therefore you would want to do the PPP even if the cost of private is close to that of what government may have paid. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. Thorpe?
Thank you, Doctor. So the first one on privatization. Look, it's I'm not sure if that perception. I can understand if there's a perception that it's a slow privatization of government, but it's not. I want to tell you a little something about what I've experienced. You know, when I go to conferences and stuff, and I talk to my colleagues in the private industry, healthcare, you know, guys from Netcare and Mediclinic and so forth, then they would say, "Oh, we're busy planning to build a hospital," and then I say, "Yeah, we're also busy planning a hospital." And then by the time I go to the next webinar and I see them again, they say, "Oh, our hospital is finished, but the government's hospital is not yet finished." And we recognize that the private industry has got the capacity to build faster and more cost-effective than government. And that is essentially what we want to tap into. We like Andre is saying, we're not handing over government assets to the private industry, but we want to find a mechanism of tapping into that innovativeness and also getting a benefit of that way of building faster and building more cost effective. And PPPs is one of those. And I'm going to leave it at that, and then you can make up your own mind. But it's not privatization, I think, for the reason that Andre gave. The other one is if it's being perceived as expensive. Nope, I can echo what Andre is saying. Remember, during the feasibility study, it's value for money, which you compare it with a public sector comparator. Your public sector comparator is if we just put it out as a tender and just build it, what is it going to cost us? And then we have to compare it to that. So, and in the long run, you stand a good chance of doing it more cost effective. All right. Thanks, Morgan.
Thank you. So, final panelist, George, please, we have 1 minute left.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I've got some feedback here, echo of some kind. I think for me, just what? Can you hear me? No.
Yes, we can hear you, but there's an echo. But George, if you're having difficulties, yeah, if you're having difficulties, it's fine. I think we at that stage where we need to close. George, I think we're going to skip your comment because of the echo. Colleagues, I think we've now exhausted our time. We'd like to bring this webinar to a close. I want to thank you, all the participants, our panel members, for participating. ITAF will be holding a series of these webinars, so we would love to have your feedback. Marty, if you can just flight the post-webinar survey QR code and the link. Please, colleagues, please help us fill your thoughts on how you've experienced this webinar so that it helps us in the content as we move forward. So finally, I think from my side, I think the evidence is showing that PPPs can be scaled. Andre introduced this concept of grouping. We need to think that further. But I think from the health sector, we can see that PPPs can contribute to diagnostic services, facilities management, digital health services, primary healthcare infrastructure, emergency, specialized smaller facilities. And I think these are useful elements for contemplating or considering new PPPs in the sector. So from my side, thank you. We are going to close, and the QR code would remain for a while. And Marty, can you assist us to close the event? Thank you.